I've earned everything from £2.60 an hour to well over six figures a year. But the biggest financial mistake I ever made had nothing to do with my salary, and it cost me hundreds of thousands of pounds. And I'm going to break it down along with every job I've ever had, every salary I earned, and also what I invested at each stage. So before we go into my jobs, before that, it's probably worth saying, I left school at 17. I attempted to do my ES levels and A levels, but for whatever reason got disillusioned with the whole education system and decided to get a job. While I was studying for my A levels, I did have a part-time job. I worked at Matalan 12 hours a week. So I worked from 7 in the morning till 11, stacking shelves, general maintenance. And for that, I was paid the princely sum of £2.60 an hour. So I got something like £30 a week for that, which was pretty much my beer tokens at 17 years old. I obviously wasn't investing any money at that point. I had nothing saved. The sum of my wealth was pretty much what I had in my bank account, which was next to nothing. After Matalan, I decided to get serious. I left college, got a full-time job, which was working for Barclays in their outbound call centre. I remember the salary because I only applied for the job because a friend I knew was working there and told me he was on £13,100 a year basic salary. That to me was a lot of money at the time, so I decided to apply. Got the job, worked at Barclays for a number of years. It was a really tough job. We're doing outbound cold calling. It was my first foray into sales. Was okay at it, pretty decent, and managed to earn some bonus as well. So I got £13,000 basic, and I actually earned at most in 1 year £8,000 in commission. So it was the first time I got into the 20,000s. I felt a bit like a weekend millionaire at that point, still living at home, going out a lot with friends as you do at that age, but I was still investing absolutely zero. I was at Barclays for quite a few years, and then I left Barclays to get a job at Sunderland Football Club. So I was working in their sales department, selling the advertising and hospitality. Again, done that for a number of years, still investing zero, but my salary did go up. So my salary was £22,500 at the football club when I started. I did have uncapped commission. I say uncapped, it was pretty much capped by the opportunity that you had, but I could earn a significant amount. The most I ever earned in my commission there was £13,000. I actually sold a deal to an Irish fella called Rom Hyde, who I still remember to this day, where he chartered a plane to bring 66 Irish people over from Cork to the Sunderland home games. We were owned by Roy Keane. It was managed by Roy Keane. Niall Quinn was the chairman, along with some other Irish consortium that owned the football club. So it was huge business in Ireland, and that was my biggest deal that I ever closed at the football club. I left actually because of some challenges with the commission. The structure changed, the earning potential changed massively. So I decided that it wasn't for me anymore, and I got a new job. And I had a very short stint selling cars. So I went to work at BMW selling cars, sold used cars there for under a year. Actually, it wasn't a very long period. The hours were crazy, and it just really wasn't for me. I do like cars, but selling cars wasn't what I'd hoped. I was pretty decent at it, though, to be fair. The basic was 12 grand, so you got paid very, very little. Probably well under minimum wage now, and probably not allowed to be done. But the OTE was decent. You could earn an OTE on track earnings. You could earn 50,000, with the top performers there earning 50 to £80,000. So there was a decent amount of earning potential, but you worked all hours God sends. You were working all weekends. You got a day off during the week, but it was high stress, high pressure, and the weekends were what I didn't really enjoy. So I did that for a while. The most I ever earned was about 50 in that year was just over 50 grand. So I just made my OTE, and that was actually being second top performer at the time. So I done well, and just made over the OTE, which was quite rare in the first year. I then left that, and I got what I describe as my first proper job as a professional seller, and that was in software sales or tech sales or software as a service, as it's well known by people in the industry. And I joined as what's called an SDR, which is a sales development representative, which basically means you've got to generate new opportunities for the company. Started doing that on a basic of £27,000. My commission was half again, so 50% of my salary I could earn in commission, so that could get me close to £40,000, but it was Monday to Friday. And I knew that the career progression there was great. People in software sales often earn six figures plus. It can be a great career if you get good at it. And this was my first rung on the ladder in software sales. And this is where I then went on to spend the rest of my career. I spent a good 4 or 5 years here, and then I was actually made redundant. It came as a bit of a shock. My salary had grown, but I was still investing zero. So to this point, I had not invested a penny. I was made redundant, didn't have any money in the bank, and had to find a job pretty quickly. Fortunately, I did that. So I stayed in software sales, and I got a job as an SDR again, or kind of head of SDR for a startup organization. And I spent the next 10 years of my career here working through the ranks and going up. I started on £31,000, which is my basic salary. Again, there was commission that I could earn. And this is also the first time that I started investing money. Started with a modest amount. So for the first 14 years of my career, I invested nothing. Now, if I'd invested £200 a month, which probably would have been very difficult when I was in Matalan, but far more achievable when I was selling the cars and when I was working in software, probably could have invested quite a lot more. But to average it out, if I'd invested £200 a month, that would have been my portfolio 200 grand better off today. So it just shows how if you get in the market early and you've got time in the market rather than timing the market, you can make those significant gains. But this is when I started around 11 years ago. I started investing a couple of £100. I paid myself first. So when my salary come in, the direct debit went out for £200 into my then Vanguard fund where I used to put it. And I've never missed a payment in all that time. The amount I've paid has fluctuated, mostly upwards. It has come down sometimes. In that period, we've had 2 kids, we've got married. There was a pandemic, so there's various different things that have affected how much have I invested, but I've always invested something over the last 11 years now, and that's got my portfolio to over £400,000 where it stands today. My peak salary, as I rose through the ranks and I went from SDR to manager to sales leader, where I was running the revenue organisation for a then American software company who had acquired us, my basic then was 90,000 plus 90,000 again if I hit my target. Unfortunately, I never actually hit that target leading that team. I inherited a team that was underperforming at the time and only had kind of 9 months or so before I actually moved on. So I never got the full 180,000, but I earned well into the hundreds of thousands of pounds. But once I got on the investing ladder, what I did notice was I was so obsessed with it that I was always looking at ways to save money. So I wouldn't spend money unnecessarily. I wouldn't waste money on things that most people consider normal purchases. What I also started to do is look for side hustles and where I could make more money to invest. And I started my side hustle, which is now my full-time job. So I started doing that side hustle and trying to earn some extra cash to invest. And the most I ever invested was £40,000 in a year. That was a really good year. We had a fantastic year at work and I had some money for my side hustle. So I managed to max out my wife and my own ISA that year and invested 40,000. Most of the time it's been nowhere near that. The average over the term will be £12,000 a year, which is still a huge amount of money. And I get that, and I've been really fortunate to have good earning potential that's enabled me to do that. But I didn't start there. Like I said, when I started my investment journey, I was on £31,000 a year. Granted, that was 11 years ago, but it was probably about the average wage in the UK back then. I think that's closer to 40 now. But yeah, like I say, it was probably about the average wage then. So I didn't start on mega bucks. But what's always inspired me is how starting to invest has improved other areas of my life. Like I said, trying to earn more money, not spend money, so I can start to invest more. Because when you start to see the compounding take hold, it really motivates you to start to do more of that. From there, I left that. I went on to an organisation where I was last, where I was CRO, so Chief Revenue Officer. My salary there was a bit of a step back, but I really loved the company. I loved the founder. I loved their kind of mission, which was all training and trying to help people get better. My basic was 80,000. My commission was 40,000. So on track earnings was £120,000. I did that for just over a year, continued with my investments at that time, probably investing anywhere between £1,000 a month and 1,500 was the average there, and continued that on until I left there in March this year. So we're into July now, so I've been self-employed now for 3 or 4 months. So my self-employed journey, the reason I did it really was freedom. My kids are getting older. My investments were at a certain point now, and that's part of the freedom you get with a decent investment fund, where you can start to think about more than just money. It wasn't about salary anymore for me. My time was far more important. Being able to pick my kids up from school, I've just been on a school trip today with my eldest, which is fantastic. You know, I didn't have to ask anybody's permission. There was parents there. In fact, there was 2 parents who had to leave halfway through because they had to get back to work and they couldn't get the time. And that just made me realize how fortunate I am that I don't have to answer to anyone and I can make those decisions now because I'm not a slave to my salary. But since being self-employed, like I did take a bit of a leap and I did back myself. But since I've done that, and I appreciate it's only 3 or 4 months, so it's very early days, I've averaged £8,000 per month in terms of what I've earned from that. So that puts me on £96,000 for the year. I've actually started to turn work away as well. I've worked way less. So I've been really fortunate. But like I say, I did back myself. I did make that risk. And I've worked really hard since I got this opportunity to try and, you know, to get some news, get some work and get myself some clients. So it certainly wasn't easy, but it feels brilliant. I work on an evening now. I work when I want. I feel like I've just got so much more freedom and control over my life. And without investing, that would never have been an option. So I think the moral of the story is, you know, start as early as you can. I know everybody wants to start 10 years ago, but the next best date, as they say, is today. So if you haven't started investing, I'd really encourage you to do so. And it just shows how you don't need to earn mega bucks, but how investing itself can actually help you earn more money along your journey as well. I'm really convinced that if I hadn't started investing, I would never have earned those kind of numbers that I did, because that motivated me to earn more money, to put in my ISA. When I started to see a compound and make more money, I become slightly obsessed with